Hello, Romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. We're at episode 85, and on today's episode, I speak with romance author Thea Claire about portraying recovery in fiction, character nuances, and bringing messy healing to the page. We chat about Thea's Recovering Good Girl series and how the first book is very personal to her, since it came from a very vulnerable place. Thea gets very candid about working through the trauma of being a young widow and recovering alcoholic while writing the first book of the series, titled Go Find Less. We discuss channeling romance and character work to reframe past relationships and the complicated feelings tied to them. We dig into how Thea builds a large, unforgettable cast of characters that reflects the found family of recovery. I would highly recommend utilizing the relationship tree on her socials for readers to follow along. Hear us talk about the protagonist's buried trauma and how it pushes them towards vulnerability and love, and why nuance matters when writing recovery and showing resilience without cliché. Full disclaimer, this episode was recorded about 8 months ago, so there's reference to the auditions for the audiobook, but now the audiobook is actually available. Links to connect to Thea, as well as other media mentions, will be listed in the episode description. I do use Amazon affiliate links for books, so if you buy through the link, it helps the podcast and is always appreciated. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, romance author and storyteller, Thea Claire. Yay!
Thanks so much for having me.
Our mutual friend, Kimberly Packard, kind of put us in a meet cute together, right? And she said,
Yes,
oh my gosh, yes, we do love. And she's like, if you want to talk to a romance author, Thea is your girl. So I was like all about this. And so in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Yeah. So like you said, I'm Thea. I am a Dallas-based, DFW area-based romance author. I published my first book in January of 2024, and then my second one just came out at the beginning of February of 2025. I started writing when I was about 12 as fan fiction, as most authors do in some form or capacity, either fan fiction or something along those lines. And I put that niche aside for marketing and professional life stuff. And I got sober in December of 2022. And they tell you when you get sober, you're going to get some sort of manic habit, hobby, something that will fill the void of alcoholism. And 3 months in, mine became reading and writing, really reading, and then writing picked up a couple months later, and wrote the first book, which is 175,000 words, in 4 months, which was, yeah, I know. For those who can't see, she's making a face.
Yes, I am making the face, guys.
Yes, which is not normal. I credit that 100% my sponsor, which I was really actively involved in AA back then. I'm not as much anymore. She had, they have you go through the steps of writing, or steps of sobriety, the 12-step program, as one does. And one of those is your fearless moral inventory, which is basically like going through and critiquing yourself and what you could have done differently, which is a crux of probably why I'm no longer in AA, because it puts a lot of self-blame versus like generational trauma and all of those things. But one of the things they make you do is go through and do like a list of all your relationships, which will make you do some self-reflection and be like, I could write something about this that could be interesting. And I did. And so it turned into that project. The second book was a fan favorite character that I was like, she's just screaming to have her own little pity party over here. So let's give her someone to have that pity party with. And came out from that. That one took me about 1.5 years, but we had some stuff, that happens in between life stuff that kept everything from getting done as fast as the first one. And I don't know that I'll ever finish one as fast as I finished the first one. So
That's okay because that first one was definitely an outlier. That is crazy. And
Well,
like
book
what?
two is 180. So it's the word count did not really change. It was just like the time frame in which I wrote that. But other than the two books, I so outside of like that side of life, I am also a former manager of an indie bookstore. So I'm a huge supporter of indie bookstores, especially here in the DFW area. We've got so many new great ones that are opening too, and then lots of favorites. And also a gigantic mental health and LGBTQ advocate. I am part of the queer community, and so I really try to include those characters in my writing, either as main characters or as side characters that are, you know, have some depth to them and are really more than just like 2D characters too.
That is such a beautiful space to be in. And like the fact that you kind of like are in between like all these very complex like communities. And you definitely bring that out. You can feel that in all your characters because you do sprinkle a bit of all of that in each of your books.
I try. I have my feet in a little bit of everything. My full-time job is education marketing. I work for a charter school system in DFW. And so I've got a little bit of everything background. Our mutual friend Kimberly Packard and I worked in nonprofits together for several years. I can write something probably about every field with enough time and research because I've done a little bit of everything. I worked in automotive care. I worked in environmental consulting for a brief period. Don't ask me why. And so there's like all these little things like I'm like, oh, I could pull from this and this.
I love that though. As writers, I think that's what we always do. We always try
Yeah.
to say like, what are the fun little, pieces of our life that we can kind of like the threads we can pull on and
Yes.
that we could like maybe even use this as a catharsis in a way.
Absolutely.
Kimberly had mentioned that you had done some recovery, but I guess I didn't realize it was so soon that you had done it in 2022, right?
Yeah, I hit 2 years in
Wow.
December. So
Congrats. That's
background,
awesome.
thank you. I have my sobriety chip somewhere around here because I got
That's
myself.
fantastic.
I'm not part of the program anymore, and it has nothing to do with like AA or like the program itself. It's more of like I know that it doesn't work for me, but I also go to a therapist who's very recovery focused and specializes in trauma and addiction. So that is not to say like don't go to AA. AA is what got me sober to begin with. So
Yeah.
I always caveat that. But it's a huge part of why I started book one and why I was able to write book one. I know we're talking about 4-letter words later, but a huge part of the writing process for book one was it was a therapy exercise for me. It was an opportunity for me to tell my story in a way that helped me kind of put a third party separation in that. Piper and the main character and female main character in book one is a widow, and I'm a widow also. And so I was able to write a lot of the trauma and experiences of that, of re-entering dating, of the community that comes with those types of traumas and the people who stick with you and thanking them into that book. And I feel like that resonated, even though people aren't, there are not enough people who are young widows or widowers to understand that side of life. But I think everybody has some sort of level of trauma and are thankful for the people who stuck with them through the trauma. And so that was a huge part of book one for me, and a huge part of the process too, like having them be a part of the release for that and getting to celebrate something positive coming out of losing my partner. And then also because of a lot of that's was a crux in my drinking, was not dealing with the trauma and the grief and all of those things that ultimately led to having a drinking problem. And so now I'm 2 years sober, and I have never really had any issues, blessedly, thankfully, I've never had any issues with drinking post sobriety. Like I've never relapsed. I have never had those issues, but I also credit the writing community and the communities that I found since starting writing, queer community and all of those groups, to really help me stay on track, because I would not be where I am without them.
Oh, absolutely. Like I've talked very much as a foster mom, we talked about dealing with trauma with our kiddos. And that was something they said was so important, was finding community, not just for the kiddos, but for us too, because that could be, it can have its own kind of blowback. So it's really important to find those communities.
Book one and book two, they both have kind of similar themes in that, like, a lot of the characters who are the side characters are people who also went through things with the main characters. So in book two, in 4-letter words, you have Liam, who is Sear, the female main character's brother. And he went through Sear getting sober. He went through her sexual assault, which is a huge crux of her character and why she is the way she is as far as relationships goes, which is totally valid. It also kind of talks about the way that affected him as her brother her younger brother, because Sierra was the caregiver, the caretaker when her parents were nowhere to be found. And so like talking about the way that that affected him. In book one, it's very similar in that Piper has this really good community of people, and you kind of see them briefly in book two at their engagement party. Spoiler. Where they're like all of these characters from book one are coming back to kind of celebrate. But all of those people in book one have a moment where they're telling Fitz, the guy who's Piper's male main character, like, hey, we all went through this with her, so we're very protective of her, and we all had this trauma, and this is how it affected us and our relationships together. So it's a little bit of a level of trauma bonding, but at the same time, recognizing that the person who was in the room with Piper when her husband passed away experienced trauma too. It wasn't her partner that passed away, but it was that person that did. And that person in my real life and I still talk about that trauma to this day, because I did have somebody like that who was in the room with me, with my in-laws and my husband when he passed away. And like those kinds of conversations would not have really been as well discussed if we had not had that on paper written down for us to be able to have those discussions and then to celebrate, you know, coming out of that on the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes just talking about it with that someone who had a shared experience within, like you said, like in the room with you, or it had this very big moment with you that was very traumatic. It can be a little cathartic just to kind of talk about that or write it out, like you said. Yes. And I'm glad. And you can tell like you're pouring your heart out, your heart and soul into these characters. You can feel it.
I try.
So, you're doing a great job. You recently released 4-letter words, right?
Yes.
So congrats. We love book releases here in the romance community. And the book is a first-person dual perspective contemporary romance about a single Scottish dad and a witty recovering alcoholic bartender. That is a sentence in itself.
It is.
So 4-letter words is the second book. You were talking about it in the series Recovering Good Girls. Yep. How does this book connect to the rest of the series? And you kind of gave us a little brief overview already.
Yeah. So book one sets kind of the stage of the characters and the friend groups and all of these different things. So one of the chief complaints about my books for people who aren't like prepared is there's so many characters to keep track of. So I've made like a relationship chart tree situation on my Instagram and have that posted on there for anybody who like decides they want to dig into this and then immediately is like, I don't know who any of these people are and I can't keep track of them. There's a relationship chart with like different colored lines. There is a inspo board with all the pictures of all the people that I picture when I'm writing it. So that kind of gives you like a better idea of like who is who and to differentiate. I didn't realize how many blondes I had written in the series until I was doing that. And I was like, man, there's a lot of blonde people in this series, but also like there's a lot of BIPOC people and all. I tried to do a good job of representation. So book one is a sort of the opposite of book two. It is a grumpy sunshine. So she's very happy-go-lucky-ish, and he is very much a stick in the mud. And that is a high school reunion romance. They're coming back together after 10 years to plan their high school reunion. And in the time since their high school reunion, she has loved and lost, and he has been divorced and cheated on. And so they're both dealing with very separate traumas and separate relationship issues while also like kind of figuring out that they have feelings for each other. There's a secondary kind of layer to that in that she slept with his best friend in high school, and his best friend ruined her reputation as the good girl, for lack of a better term. And so she was like the stick in the mud, good girl, like purity ring, all of those things, which I can say with a full chest because I was also that person. And she slept with the wrong guy and found out some things, and he outed her and her exploits to the school. And so that's like the context in which the male main character is going into that first book, learning then very shortly after what she's been through since then and kind of how that changes the perspective on things. Piper is definitely a layer of me. She is much more a layer of me than Seer, our second female main character, with some changes. Piper is a lingerie designer. I do not have the skill for that. It's gorgeous and fun. Do not have that. And also she's got a lot more independence, I think, than I have. I'm very much like I've always kind of been in relationships. I've always been very much like a community-based person. And I've always said that Piper has a little bit more of the bravery that I wish I would have had post post losing my husband, because I jumped immediately into cohabitation. I jumped into like all of the things that I really needed to process that I didn't. And she has processed those things a little bit better than I have. She's also a recovering alcoholic, so that's where the series title comes from. Piper's AA journey is a little bit more similar to mine. She starts in AA and she's still actively involved in it in the books, but it is not an overwhelming theme. I think it helps kind of talk about those ways that we cope that don't actually help us process or cope in a healthy way. And then book 2, our female main character, Seer, is the fan favorite character from book 1 as far as side characters go. When polled, everybody was like, I want a book about Seer. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm glad we're all on the same page, because that's the one I started. And I started that one before we finished book 1, because I knew exactly what direction I wanted to go with her. And book 2, 4-letter words. So book 1 had 283 F-bombs. Book 3 had 390 something, I think. So there's a lot of 4-letter words, plus like other 4-letter words in those books, but like there's a lot. And Seer and Piper and all of them, kind of like, one of the things we say in AA is that fine is kind of a dismissal. The word fine is a dismissal of feelings or of actual emotions, and it's kind of just saying, it's glossing over like how you're really feeling. And so, as you know, book 2 kind of starts out with that discussion of like building those walls and pretending like everything's okay when it's not. And with Seer, like, she loves everybody. She is a caretaker to a T. She has these like walls that she builds with relationships and with people that weren't necessarily like part of her friend group or part of her like her core group. And so she's really good about putting on that like mask and that face level, I'm okay. Enter Harry McLaren, who is a very, very cinnamon rolly single dad, very gooey, and just loves, I know he's the cutest. And he's a big old nerd and a gamer, and is just hopelessly and irrevocably in love with Seer, and it is adorable. And their journey is a like black cat golden retriever. We said that. They are very much opposites in a lot of ways, and Seer spends her time back and forth between her house and Ren Fair, and that's a huge component of it, is her time as a Ren Fair princess. They get to experience some forced proximity when some stuff happens and Harry is no longer able to live in his house, so she goes from her and her cat to her cat, Harry, his daughter, and his brother, who is also a fan favorite character. It's a fun little jaunt through a couple of different pieces of my life. We got Seer being sober and a bartender, which I've also done. I was really frequently bartending until recently, and love it. And Ren Fair is also a huge part of my life. I love Ren Fair. I was on a cast for one of the ones here for several years, and I love getting to share that fair family, like behind the scenes stuff that not everybody gets to see. Not as in depth as I wish I could have, but the book was already 180,000 words. So
I do love the descriptions of the Ren Fair and things like that, because that is a community in itself. I know a bunch of friends who do that.
I went for the first time in costume after 10 years last year. I hadn't finished this book because I didn't finish book 2 until December of last year. But I knew where the direction was going. I had like a good chunk of it written, and I really wanted to have gone after finishing the book just to relive some of the stuff. But I was like, nah, I'm gonna go this year. And my then partner got to really see like how many people I knew, because when you're there as a 14 or 15-year-old on cast, or at least being involved, like, people will protect you. They'll be your mom and dad, and so you've got a lot of people who are like willing to like lay down their life to make sure that you don't get sexually harassed by the drunk idiot down the street. And so because of that, you just people 3 times my age who were like my second and third dad, mom, and all those people, one of whom came to my signing at Pantego last weekend, actually. And it's fun to see how all those different worlds collide in that way, for sure.
I love that. I will make reference to something you said earlier, because that is something I found utterly hilarious, was when you said fine. And like at one point, Piper tells Seer, like, was one of the only 4-letter words we're worried about over here. Yeah, is fine. And that is something Seer does constantly. Is she just kind of, like you said, just kind of goes through the motions and just kind of steady, like, ignores it, ignore. And that is something that we were taught early on when we were fostering, is that, no, fine does not cut it. Tell us what's like, give us an emotion, just one.
Yeah. A lot of that too, I've learned comes from, and this is something I've worked through with my therapist, is it comes from a fear that you're responsible for other people's reactions to your emotions, right? So a lot of that comes from, and this is something that I did a lot of research too on narcissistic parenting and everything, because Sierra's mom is very clearly a narc. When you have narcissistic parents or parents who are emotionally immature, you are constantly told and expected, maybe not told verbatim, but expected that you manage your emotions because they can't. So when someone asks you how you're doing and you don't want to deal with the repercussions of their emotional reaction or the way that that might impact them, you say you're fine, because it doesn't answer one way or the other, but you at least don't have to then deal with the ramifications of having, oh, well, I'm actually having a really shitty day. And then that person's like, well, you know, I'm having a shitty day too. And then they go on and they make you feel worse. And so that's something, you know, I didn't really realize what the crux of it was until I was in AA, and we had like a really big discussion about it. And now it's kind of a joke in my current household, because I live with roommates, and one of my roommates is like my first round editor. She's a English teacher, and she and I very much are on the same page on a lot of things. So when she's like, I'm fine, and we just look at each other, and I was like, it's fine. Everything's fine. It's all fine. And we know that the code is like, it's not actually fine, but we're not in a place where we're okay to talk about it. I collected for the first like year that I was sober a pin for every month that I was sober, like a enamel pin. And that was the first one that I bought. Was the it's
Perfect.
fine, everything's fine.
Perfect. I love
everything was on fire, but I was still alive, and I hadn't gotten a DUI. I hadn't almost killed myself in a car accident, as Sear almost did. Like, I hadn't done any of these things. And I was like, okay, in the grand scheme of things, I am okay, but like everything's on fire.
Speaking of which, like, you had the protagonist Sear, who is a recovering alcoholic, be also a bartender.
Yeah.
And that's a very complex situation. Not to get into spoilers, but you have it kind of in the first chapter of like when she sees like her ex get engaged, and she's just like heartbreak. So what drove you to create such a complex character who faces like a vice on the daily?
Yeah. I mean, personal experience is definitely a huge part of it. I was bartending when I got sober, and I took a break from it. And it's always been a really like fun side hustle for me, because I love meeting people. It's one of the ways that I meet people that I like insert into books and base characters on, especially when I wasn't like out and socializing and doing a lot of things. They started writing again. I had this kind of, like you said, like the outlet for what was at one point drinking and alcohol. And I didn't feel the need to drink anymore. I had dealt with a lot of that trauma. Was actively dealing with it. I had a really good support system, and going back to bartending felt like a way to control that vice in a way that I could manage, because you can't, I mean, legally and also like morally, drinking on the job, not a good idea. I had a really great supportive bartending boss that like knew if I said I couldn't take a gig, I was feeling something. Like I said, I've never really had any issues with relapse. It's not the case for the majority of people, I will say. Sear is so control focused. Like, she's very much a dommy mommy, as we talk about in the book. She loves having the control of the situation. And I think for her, especially since there's not a whole lot of money to be made in being a training chef, so she was dealing with a way to make money while also controlling that vice for herself. And I think that's a huge part of the strength for her character too, is that balance that she has between the control and giving control away to other people. And I think that's a huge part of the story, is her recognizing that she can give away some of that control, some of that affection, because it's worth the risk of, you know, not having love, not having true family. That heartache is worth the risk for that.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of loved about her character development, was this kind of like very close, you know, warm with her friends, but very closed off towards everyone else. Slowly over time, kind of like she branched that trust out to other people.
One of the lines that I wanted to, you know, like kind of got trimmed out was Sear was a nanny for a period. And they kind of mentioned that she was Andrea's nanny. Andrea, who is Sear's mentor's daughter, was Franny Fitz and Freddie's nanny growing up, and that's briefly mentioned in book 1, but they don't really like go into it. Book 2, we talk about Sear being Andrea's nanny. So she's got like these like adopted kids that like are her little nieces because they're both girls. Which that comes from me because the person who was in the room with me when my husband passed away was the mom of the girls that I nannied for years. And she is basically my older sister. I talk to her all the time. So there's all of these like references to that. But Sear has kids in her life that she loves. Like she's got Bridget, her niece. She's got Amy and Hannah, who are Andrea's kids. But I think if for her, like she never even thought about having kids because she was just so like focused on her career and focused on basically just getting through things without actually opening up to people. And so for her, the idea of having somebody like that she could like ruin like by bad parenting by example is terrifying to her. As somebody who is on a lot of medications and has like a lot of mental health like challenges, some of which are hereditary, I think adoption has always been something that I've considered as I was growing up and watching, you know, families around me. I had several friends who were adopted or who had adopted siblings. And so it was an easy, you know, jump for me, not to mention, obviously, Liam and Jesse cannot biologically have children unless they use a surrogate because they're a gay male couple. But at the same time, that's still, I know so many people who just can't have kids. Or for me, one of my biggest fears is like the ramifications of getting off medications and all of those things that come with carrying your own biological child that could potentially like impact their life long term. And so those are the kinds of conversations like nobody's talking about like the very real concern of like, you have a generation of people who are actually dealing with their trauma and their problems and on medications and stuff, but like are terrified to get off of those because no one's doing research about how to mitigate those challenges when you're pregnant. So that's a whole other conversation though. We could do an entire episode on that.
Oh my gosh, I really want to. But kind of speaking on that a little bit, you explore so many intricate and important themes of like addiction, yes, but trauma is a big part of it. Like you said, like Sear's narcissistic mom. So like no two people are the same when dealing with those things, right? Everyone deals with their own experiences differently. So there's mention, you know, Sear in 4-letter words has been to an AA meeting for everyone else but herself lately.
Yeah.
Given there are multiple protagonists in the Recovering Good Girl series, some are which recovering alcoholics, do their struggles and where they are in their journeys look different in each story?
They do. And I think a lot of it has to do with where you're at in life when you meet an addiction or challenge that's hard to overcome. I'm very lucky that when I really started to admit that I had a problem, my therapist at the time, who I had been seeing for years, she saw me through my husband's right after my husband's diagnosis with cancer to after his passing, which was about a 2-year period. And then years after that. And she recognized straight up, I don't have the skills to deal with an addiction. And very quickly found me somebody who was recommended that is still my therapist to this day. And she and I talk all the time about how the support system that you have and where you're at totally dictates how you handle recovery. And so that's why so many people talk about recovery or addiction is a disease. But like every disease, your treatment and your recovery process is dependent upon how you access those resources and what you can do with those things. And so for Piper, at least in her case, she's got a very affluent family. And it's very evident when Fitz like goes to their house, like they're upper middle class, like at worst. And upper middle class families typically, for the most part, do not have challenges accessing mental health care or those types of things. My family was very mental health positive. I was very lucky in that we had like a family psychologist. We had somebody who like was very much like, I got diagnosed with ADHD before I went to college. That kind of stuff was never something that I had challenges talking about. Sear's family, on the other hand, it's never really discussed, but her father was an immigrant from Ireland. Later in the series, talk more about their background because we're actually going to meet Sear's grandparents later on in the series. But when you're talking about immigrants who are coming over, especially during wartime, because they would have been coming over during discourse that was happening between Northern and Southern Ireland, and a narcissistic parent who is not necessarily focused on parenting because they're too busy dealing with a very clearly alcoholic husband. It's kind of clear that he was also kind of dealing with his own challenges. it doesn't have, you don't have the support system there. And so you fall into the, I'm fine, everything's fine, it's all fine, and don't learn how to cope with it until you crash your car into a pole. Like that's where Sierra ended up. Our third female main character, which I think you can probably guess, this is a spoiler alert. So if you are listening and you haven't read book 2, I would pause and come back in like 30 seconds. The third female main character is not an alcoholic, and you can probably guess who it was based on the epilogue from book 2, but that's going to be Franny. And Franny is a whole different ball game because she on set to be a professional athlete and had a career-ending injury. Part of that is recovering from an eating disorder. Those types of conversations, I think, book 1, Piper's plus size, and I'm currently writing another plus size female main character for my fantasy project. But Franny is athletic. She's Sierra describes her as lithe and beautiful and always polished, but like behind that, you don't know what's happening with somebody, and they may look like that on the outside, but they may feel like utter trash on the inside. And so those are the kinds of conversations that I feel like are being left out of a lot of those. And so the eating disorder side of life, recovering side of that, I think most people don't realize like what that recovery takes, and I wanted to focus on that as well.
That's still a valid struggle that a lot of people go through, even, at any stage of life. You can even develop one older as you get older. When you say recovering good girls, you're talking a big, like a spectrum. Big spectrum of different types.
Yeah. So. And there's originally this one was going to be, this series was going to be 7 books. And I was like, well, maybe we need to trim down on that. And I still have all of those stories planned, but I think the goal right now is for Franny's story to be the last of the Recovering Good Girls like trilogy, and the other books will be spinoffs of the same kind of universe.
Yeah, because that is really ambitious. 7 books. Ooh, and I'm definitely going to have to check out the family tree you made for all the characters, because I did get a little lost at first, but like, listen, I like to just hang in there and ride by the seat of my pants. So I was like, let's go. I'll figure it out.
I'm really excited for the audiobook on these ones, because I think the audio is going to be like the way I have a spreadsheet of all the characters and like their descriptors. So that way people know like this person has a little bit of a Texas accent. We've got like all of just a variety of things and notes. Right before we got on this call, I got an email from the audiobook company with examples for book 1.
I actually did think that when I was reading it, I was like, man, this would be great in audio. Yeah. I just felt that like all the characters.
Scottish man, of course. Why not?
Absolutely. That's an automatic buy for me.
Yeah. And I sent a list of like people that I love that I like also would really love to narrate, but that they always have come back with like some really great like new voices too that I've never heard. And I'm an audiobook girly, but I'm a fantasy audiobook girly, so I know all the fantasy narrators. I don't know like a lot of the contemporary narrators. For like casting, I was like, I have like very few suggestions on these, because all I'm listening to is The Witch Collector and ACOTAR, and all the ones that really need the audiobook to understand what's happening.
There's some crossover too there, romance and fantasy.
And book 1, I've been a little more guarded about that one because it is such a personal story to me. So I come up with previously audition sides, which are basically like pieces of the book that are about 500 words that give a good showcase of like the range of emotions or voices that the narrators are going to have to give. And so for book 1, there is a very emotional scene. I always apologize to people for this chapter. I'm like, I'm so sorry for chapter 11. My bad, guys. It makes everybody cry every single time. Like I've never met a person who didn't cry at that chapter. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. But that's what I chose is like Piper's audition. And then the second one for Fitz was like a spicy scene, because like I need to hear the male narrator's female voice reading a spicy scene.
Thank you. You're doing us a service, because if it gets a little like, if it's too much, I can't.
And it's awkward. And like dual and duet, like that you could make a whole other episode about that. But someone was bitching on Threads last week about like why authors don't pay for or don't get duet narration for every audiobook. I'm like, look, the cost difference is astronomical.
Yes.
Like it is so expensive, and people don't realize that. So anyways, I could go on a tangent about that too.
Yeah, I actually have a whole episode about narration, like a couple of episodes about it. Yeah, and it gets, oh my God, it gets so pricey. It's crazy. So we digress. There was great strength in creating your own family support group. We kind of talked a little bit about that, especially with those shared experiences and commonalities. They're kind of there to all help uplift each other. In the book, Seer leans on her found family. How do the aspects of identity and family shape your stories?
Yeah, we touched on a lot of that. I think for me, reading was always a huge part of my identity for as long as I can remember. And then it kind of took a piggyback to a lot of other things career-wise, focused on things that like I knew actually could make me money because adulting. And at the time when I stopped really reading, it was when I was in college and I was really focused on like relationships and kind of shaped myself to the people I was in relationships with for the longest time. And one of the biggest things about getting sober was really doing a lot of self-work about who I was as a person and really having to come to terms with that. A huge part of that was coming out as bi, now pan, as part of the queer community. And I've always been an ally, and I've always had a lot of really good friends who are part of the community, from everything from trans to non-binary and everything, everything in between. And I think for me, that was like the crux of really figuring out who I was like, oh God, like here, this is a huge piece of me that I just didn't realize like was actually there. I knew it was kind of in the background, but I never really like took time to consider it. Being a part of the queer community is reconciling who is okay with your identity and who is okay with when you were putting on a mask. And there's various moments, especially in book 1, where you see people who were part of Piper's journey, especially with her husband, Mickey, that no longer associated with her, or who didn't want to be a part of that, because the piece of her identity that they enjoyed, that they liked, was no longer there, her husband. And the way that she had changed, people, one of the things we talk about a lot in therapy is that people get upset by change because they were comfortable with the person that you were, not the person that you are. And I think for Piper especially, she experiences a lot of that. Seer, on the other hand, aside from being sober, has always been the same brash, witty person that she is currently. And really for her, like, her circle has always been so small because I think a lot of her trauma started way earlier than her drinking problem. She's experienced having to start over and create a whole new community when she moved when she was a child. She's experienced having to really hone in on what is important to her when balancing and juggling so many different things. I think because of that, the found family aspect just kind of comes naturally, because what is found family if not a bunch of people who really truly love you for who you are, no matter who you are. If they're not there after change, if they are freaking out because you've changed something about yourself, then they didn't really ever love you to begin with. And that's something that I've recently relatively experienced personally. I went through a pretty big relationship shift last summer. I'd come out as bi in the middle of this relationship, and my partner was very supportive, and we've both grown and changed so much that just wasn't compatible anymore. And a huge part of adulting is realizing that happens. It sucks, but it happens. You aren't friends with people that you've been friends with for years. But when you realize that, like, the part of you that they're no longer interested in being friends with is something that's so core to your being, like, you just have to accept they're never going to change, and you're not going to change yourself to fit that mold. I think that's when that found family aspect and those types of identity pieces really hone in. And so for me now, post first book publishing, post relationship, post all of those things, I spent the last year basically figuring out who I was as a person, as a queer person, as a writer, first time actually, really truly considering writing as part of my identity. And it's been one of the best years of my life as far as that goes. So
discovering that piece of yourself that really had always been there. Like, yeah. Were you in the midst of writing this book? Because you already had the representation in there.
I did. So book 1, I started in March of 23. I read a lot of books in 2023. Like, while writing my book in 4 months, I also read 115 books. So I like went in hard and heavy. A large chunk of those were LGBTQ. We love to call them why choose, but like polyamory, and those types of romances that really have a lot of diverse characters. And I kind of realized like, yeah, this is I'm definitely like, I credit Emily Rath from Pucking Around is like probably my favorite book of all time as far as like romance genre goes. It's probably like my favorite book of all time, period. And she knows this. Like I tell her this all the time on Threads. But like that book was such a huge part of my identity and coming out, because I was like, I was in a relationship with a very cis, very hetero white dude. He was 6'6". Like he is the straightest, whitest dude you could meet. Me being me doesn't change that relationship. Like it's just a piece about myself that I didn't really come to terms with until that. And so I came out in August, like the community being so supportive and being so appreciative of the queer community as a whole, like the writer community being that way. It didn't make me feel afraid to share that information. It didn't make me feel like it would affect my readership. And it's in the same way that we're dealing with all of these same kind of scenarios right now. But the people that I want to read my books are people that enjoy and understand and appreciate the diversity of the characters, and who understand that it's important to have people around you who aren't like you, not necessarily people who are intolerant or who bring you down because you're trying to diversify your, the population of people around you. But it's important to have friends in different communities who have different perspectives. And that's been a huge piece of why I think I am the way that I am, especially now, is the last couple of years of being a part of the writing community and the book community as a whole, especially.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love that the book community as a whole has really become so much more diverse and inclusive of so many different types of stories, especially the romance genre. Like I love that we're leading the charge on that one. That's just
it's a fuck around and find out community. Like don't, for sure. Like especially recently, like if you mess with somebody, like the whole it's both terrifying and awesome, because I'm always constantly afraid that I'm gonna like my nails are going to mistype something and I'm going to accidentally put like a word I shouldn't or something like that, like totally on accident, and just get immediately like the barrage. I'm like, no, I'm so sorry. It's my coordination skills, not my brain.
Oh my God. I feel the same way, because I'm just so like, I try to do so much research, or like friends of friends, to make sure that we're all on the same page. Everybody is good, but then I'm just so scared. The one interview I do, and this is going to, I'm going to be eviscerated because I didn't realize something.
And that's a huge part too, I think, of why when you do the due diligence, people appreciate it, because not everybody does. And so the books that have the poor representation of marginalized communities or of sensitive topics are the ones that really polarize people, right? Like I've really learned that like sometimes there are people who get it and there are people who don't. And so when I was writing, especially book 2, book 1, the characters are a little bit less diverse than I probably would have liked them to be. I think it's kind of obvious that Piper is Mediterranean, so she's white. Like Italian is Caucasian. Like I had to have like this whole research project and discussion with people about how it's a white character. But because of that, like I filled her life with so many diverse characters, because that's how my life is. I'm not surrounded by white cis het people all the time. Book 2, we've got a BIPOC male main character. You've got a single dad. You've got sexual assault, which is not something I personally have experience with, thank heavens. And I'm very thankful for that. But that's not something that I can write from personal experience. As authors should and do, I brought in sensitivity readers for those things, not to mention Sears' hearing impairment, her deafness.
Yes.
And so I had people look at the book before I hit publish, of like, I need you to just make sure that I am doing this justice. And I was pleasantly surprised by the feedback. I took notes from several things and added more, because people were like, no, we need more of this. I was like, okay, cool. And I just like went ham, like especially with like the sign name and things like that. Like one of my beta readers, Nova, who is fantastic, she was giving great feedback about like how important sign names are to the deaf community, and really bringing that back full circle in the later chapters and everything. And so I was like trying to make sure that I did those communities justice, while also recognizing that I am not a part of those communities. My goal is always to make those pieces a part of their identity, but not their entire identity. And I think that's the way a lot of people should handle those types of things, because Harry, being half Japanese, is a part of his identity. His mom talks about being raised in a Japanese traditional household, but that's not his entire identity, while also handling those things with an appropriate carefulness as a very white, pale person who is in zero way, in zero way anything but Caucasian. So
yeah, no, but that is such a great like approach to it. I even had a whole episode dedicated to that too, about both disabilities and writing an identity that is not your own. And that is such a big factor. And part of that is like, even when you have the lived in experiences, other people have different experiences.
yes.
And so it's important just to get their feedback too, so that you're bringing the most authentic version as possible. And I feel like the romance community really does a lot of due diligence there on that part to really make that happen.
Abby Jimenez talks a lot about that too with some of her books, because she's got really great sensitivity readers that she keeps on deck. And I think it was a Today Show interview that she did a couple months ago talking about that, especially for her most recent release. And I always think those are interesting conversations, like when big authors are like, oh yeah, we definitely do this. It's like, thank God.
Like, yes, and thank you for talking about it.
Yes.
I love me a good opposites attract trope. We are talking about that, where we have like the black cat and the golden retriever mix, and oh my God, they're so cute. I just want to kiss them. So, like, what was the most challenging part of writing Seer, who's, a little bit like, I'm fine, I'm good.
Yeah.
And Harry, who's just like so lovable. He's so cuddly.
The golden retriever.
Cuddly, yes.
He's so adorable.
About their budding relationship. Like, what was the challenging part?
So there's several funny stories I could tell with this, but so obviously Piper, book one, we're very similar people. I think I started writing Seer and Harry when I was in a very different place. Like I started writing this in probably August of 2023, so right before I finished book one. And in my head, Seer is always this like sassy, but she was never as closed off as I made her, like the final piece. And as I went through a big breakup, as I was doing all of these things, she became a little bit more like me at the time. And so a huge part, I think, of why this book took as long as it did is because I was reconciling the fact that I had become a little bit more like Seer and was trying to dig myself out of that mental headspace. And a huge part of that is like the queer community, the community people that I am was friends with. I did at one point over the summer date a nerdy single dad who I did not know was a Star Wars nerd until I saw the Lego sets in his house and was like, oh no, what have I done? Like I was like, I manifested this while also accidentally manifesting. There's a scene in book one that Piper and Fitz, the first time they are being intimate, she accidentally kicks him in the face. And I accidentally did that last year. And I was like, of all the things I could manifest from these books, it had to be the kicking the dude in the face. Like really. But I think one of the hardest things that I struggle with when reading some romance is that you complete me. The like, we're missing puzzle pieces, very much like my life would never be the same without you type of thing. And it's hard for me as somebody who is very independent to ever think about my life being dependent upon somebody else. And I really did think that way for a long time. Like my husband and I were very much very codependent. Now I especially in my current relationship, my goal has been finding somebody who complements me, not completes me, and who brings out those great characteristics in me that are already there without making me feel like I'm less than a whole person in a relationship. And that is really the goal I went into with Piper and Fitz and Seer and Harry, because they are fully formed adults with their own lives and their own friends. And yeah, those friend groups are going to meld. They're going to become part of each other's like core being. But at the same time, like as I have learned and as Piper learned, shit happens. And so having your entire identity being built around a relationship, around a person, makes it a lot harder for you to separate those things when it comes to especially decisions about like yourself and your mental health, your priorities. And so that's a huge piece of writing those characters. When it comes to the opposites piece, I was raised by a very soft-spoken guy with a very loud woman. My parents are very much like high strung and low energy. And that's kind of how my partners have always been very low energy. They're very great. Like they're awesome, the golden retrievers, almost all the time. But having that like understanding and watching that growing up definitely helped witness and turn those characters into something a little more relatable.
Well, we have talked all about these incredible books and like all the love, all the, all the soul and heart that you put into them.
Yeah.
So where can listeners find your books and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so all of my books, my 2 books, are available on any major retailer's website. They're also available for order through your favorite indie bookstore. Most people don't realize if you go to an indie bookstore, they will order that for you for the most part. And you just give them either the ISBN or the author name, and they can look it up in their system, and it benefits them. Bookshop.org is also a really great way to support indie bookstores because it gives a portion of their proceeds to your selected bookstore. So you can support whichever one is local to you. I am on Kindle Unlimited. Those 2 books are on Kindle Unlimited right now. And indie authors, for those of you who don't know, do get paid per page read. So if you read it, if you're a shelf trophy girly and you want the shelf trophy, but you also want to read it on KU, we do get paid for KU reads. Because I'm a shelf trophy girly, as evident by my bookshelf behind me. And then I am on pretty much every major social platform at Thea Claire Author, TheaClaire. And my goal right now is to have my fantasy project finished before the September conferences and out. So we will see. Fingers crossed. They said it in the Dallas Observer that I was doing it, so now I have to do it.
Oh yeah, you got pressure.
I was like, one of my friends sent me the screenshot and they're like, oh, she actually said it. I was like, damn it. So I can't change the series order on this now. But my next project was always going to be poly. And so I was like, fine, screw it. I'm just going to do it. So now I'm writing an MMF polyamory, why choose romance, but fantasy set in Austin. So I'm super excited. That's what I get to go back to write tonight.
Oh yeah. No pressure, right? Yeah. Now it's out in the print. So yeah. Everybody's waiting. So, okay. Well, I'm so excited to hear more about that. And so good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to Thea for joining the show. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That way, you're the first to hear new episodes when they drop. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave a review. It helps support the show and allows more opportunity to bring in all kinds of fantastic guests. There's also a link to the YouTube channel in the description if you'd like to see the interviews with some of the guests and see them show off their lovely books. As always, stay safe, be well, and keep writing. Bye!